Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Real National Dialogue with myself, Jonathan Mokes, and Paul Berkowitz. Paul, how are you doing in sunny Johannesburg?
Having a good day, Jonathan. As you said, the weather is sunny and beautiful, and made better by spending some time with you. How are things over in London? Not so sunny.
Not so sunny, gloomy, as ever they say. It's 3 months of winter and 9 months of bad weather in the UK, but good to channel some of your sunshine through the virtual Zoom platform. So lots to discuss as ever, but I think we'll keep it focused this week on the by-elections contested both last Wednesday and yesterday. So we're recording Thursday, the 18th of September. So we've got two rounds of by-elections to unpack and discuss. We also going to discuss today the ANC roll call of all its councillors that took place at the FNB Stadium on Monday. And then thirdly, the big story that's happening this week, which is the start of the Madlanga Commission, and of course the testimony of Lieutenant General Makhwanazi. So lots to dig into, and let's start with one of your favorite topics in the world, Paul, and that's of course by-elections.
Yes.
So yeah, shall we get into that? And so last Wednesday, there were three ANC wards that were contested. One in Kokama, Eastern Cape, one in Naledi, Soweto, in the city of Johannesburg, and one in Nala in the Free State. And maybe let's start with Kokama, where the Patriotic Alliance won a ward off the ANC. And just bear with me, listeners and viewers, because there's a bit of background to this particular ward. So in the local government election in 2021, the ANC won this ward with 53% of the vote. The DA came second with 38%, and the PA was quite far away with 5%. Now, interestingly, there was a by-election in this very same ward in August of last year, 2024, where the ANC retained the ward with a reduced 46%, but the PA surged from 5% in the local election to 33%, and the DA dropped to 21%. And then last week, the PA increased even further to 48%. The ANC came second at 43%, but the DA dropped to a very low 9%. So in the space of what's this now, 4 years, the DA's dropped by almost 30 percentage points in the ward. Our understanding is that there's a significant coloured South African population in the ward, so this may mirror some of the trends, Paul, that you've been discussing and writing about in respect of the PA's growth in the Western Cape.
Yes, Jonathan. And we know the Western Cape has got a particular demographics. A majority of the South Africans living in that province are classified as coloured. We know that the PA appeals very strongly, it proactively courts coloured voters, sometimes preying on their fears, the dark side of the negative campaigning. So wherever there is a significant colored population at the municipal or at the ward level, that's a potential target for the PA. And as you said, interesting, of the PA's surge, its growth of about almost 45% over the last 5 years, most of that, as you said, 30 percentage points from the DA, maybe another 10 from the ANC, and and potential for the party outside the Western Cape, provided it can find those wards with the demographic it's
Yeah.
appealing to. We know Nelson Mandela Bay, a quarter of the population classified as colored. We know the PA's done well there and continues to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think a recent data point from this year is a ward in Nelson Mandela Bay where the PA ran the DA a very, very close
Yeah.
second, and it is quite evident that the PA's traction does come from a particularly defined demographic voter base. So we'd obviously love a few more data points in the run up to next year's local government elections. So let's see whether there's anything more in the Eastern Cape. But I think yet again, evidence that the PA is going to be damaging to the DA, but also to the ANC, certainly in the Western Cape, but in certain areas in the Eastern Cape. Then,
Definitely. Just one
yeah, go for it.
final point, maybe a small silver lining, Jonathan, for the DA in this particular one. If I'm not mistaken, this is a DA-controlled municipality.
Yes.
So to swap one opposition ward seat from the ANC to another one, not necessarily so bad for the DA, but of course this doesn't happen in isolation.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. So let's now move to Soweto. And this is an interesting result. So this was Ward 130 in Naledi in Johannesburg. It was contested by a number of parties, but I think the significant ones that contested the ward were the ANC, MK, EFF, and Action SA. Notable and sort of following a pattern that we've seen in Nelson Mandela Bay and Tshwane, that the DA did not contest this ward in Soweto, which is a little bit strange, especially considering I hear that they're going to announce their mayoral candidate for the city of Johannesburg in Soweto, but they're not contesting by-elections in Soweto. But I suppose that's for another discussion. But the ANC held on to the ward, but they will not have been pleased with the result because they dropped from 56% to 34%. I think the party that will probably be the most pleased by last Wednesday's results is Action SA, which came second in the ward with 23% of the vote. It's a increase from 2021, but a significant increase from what they achieved in the provincial election last year, where they were really, really sort of decimated in Soweto. And then MK came in third at 22 percentage points and probably are, I would say, almost solely responsible for the ANC's drop. And it kind of shows how damaging MK can be in the city of Johannesburg and potentially other places in Gauteng. And then EFF largely holding their share of the vote with 17%. But I think the two big stories from this ward, Paul, are Action SA, which coming in with a very strong second place, and then MK basically taking a whole chunk of the vote from the ANC.
Yes, Jonathan. And for me, this was the most interesting ward of the day because we've been talking through polling in the last few months. We've been talking through opinion pieces, and a question that comes up a lot is how low can the ANC go?
Mm,
And I think this is a very interesting data point. The ANC only got a third of the vote, 34%, in the heart of Soweto, in a ward that they had a majority in for decades.
mm,
And and the other interesting thing for me in the ward is that the turnout fell from 44 to 31%. Well, Jonathan, we've spoken a lot about how DA wards, particularly urban wards in the metros, we've seen very low turnout
mm,
over by-elections. The party still manages to bring the vote in the general elections, and I think we're going to see a ward like that from yesterday in a couple of
mm,
minutes.
mm.
But the ANC's got to be worried, not just that it dropped the vote, but that in its heartland, in its previous strongholds, that turnout is so low. So you've got this apathy, you've got this concern with an upcoming local government election where we know that differential turnout could play a huge role. And the ANC's got to be hoping that this is again just a by-election blip, that it can get the numbers up, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and as we discussed on our podcast with Lukhona Mnguni, I mean, it's not just the DA that achieves differential turnout in low turnout situations. It's also MK now,
Yeah.
who clearly managed to achieve a bit of differential turnout in this ward. Then the third by-election last week was Ward 7 in Nala in the Free State. It was a very, very tight contest, so that the ANC holding off the EFF, so ANC 50%, EFF 47%. The ANC slightly down from 54% previously, but the EFF significantly up from 25% to 47%. The poll percentage turnout was 63%. And there was a local party called the Nala Community Forum, which had got a significant chunk, 17%, but almost sort of collapsed to 3% last Wednesday. So I think the EFF would have been particularly pleased with this result. I mean, they've had some difficult by-elections of late, and as we've been documenting, sort of eclipsed in many respects by MK, but they ran the ANC very close and clearly have mopped up all the opposition votes in that ward.
Yes, the EFF will be very pleased. And this raises a question that comes up from time to time when we look specifically at by-elections, Jonathan. Did the EFF do so well, growing by 22 percentage points from 25 to 47, because that's all EFF growth? Or did it, as you say, mop up what would have been the opposition vote?
Mm,
Because the ANC didn't fall so far. And this is a question we ask particularly because there's a thinning of the ranks. There's normally only a few parties that contest a by-election, whereas even in a local government election, you could have dozens.
mm,
And as you said, Jonathan, the fact that the poll went from 53% turnout in 2021 to 63% turnout last week has to answer that question in the EFF's favor to a
mm,
large degree. That it's people who are proactively voting for the party, not just against the ANC.
mm. Yeah, I think it does, and I mean, we don't know the details, but I would suspect that the EFF clearly put a huge operational focus on this particular ward in an attempt to win it from the ANC. So I suspect what a by-election, and we've discussed this before, what a by-election often does is distort reality because you're able to sort of flood the ward with resources that you would not be able to dedicate if you're contesting well, in the rest of the country in the context of a local government election.
Quite right, but we know the EFF has been resource
Yes.
constrained in general.
Yeah.
And as you said, this may be an isolated ward. It may be a case of concentrating resources, but I'm going to keep an eye on the Free State as potential
Yeah.
growth area for the EFF in the next election, because let's face it, it's been shut down in a lot of other places.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Then yesterday, being Wednesday, the 17th of September, so there were two wards, one DA ward, one ANC ward. Let's start with the DA ward, Ward 56 in eThekwini. A particularly interesting ward because I think there's a strong demographic mix. So the
Hmm.
DA had previously got 56% of the vote in the local government election. In percentage terms, they increased yesterday, so they retained the ward going up to 63%. MK came in second at 22%. Obviously, they didn't contest in 2021. The ANC third at 10%, dropping from 24%. So again, losing out primarily, I would say to MK, and then Rise Mzansi, the kind of best of the rest, with 3% of the vote, and then the EFF at 1%, dropping from 6%. I think we've quite clearly seen in KZN that MK's rise has really sort of wiped out the EFF in KZN. I think on turnout, a very low poll, you alluded to it, 24%, down from 41% in the local government election. So I think the DA's differential turnout operation working well. And if I'm not mistaken, Paul also enabled them to recover lost ground from last year's provincial election, where I think MK would have performed a lot better in the ward, probably because of turnout.
Yes, and I think turnout is the key one here, Jonathan. As you said, a very low 24%. Nothing new. We've seen this across, as we said a few minutes ago, a lot of DA wards in the metros, but the party seems to know what it's doing. It appeals to its base and it gets
Mm,
the vote out. So, in number terms, in actual votes, probably down from 2021, but in percentage terms up. 22% good for MK, mirroring what they got last year in the provincial vote. And I
Mm,
think before this by-election, there was a concern, there was a worry. We thought this would be a more interesting or a closer
mm.
contest. We thought there was a chance that the DA could lose the ward. And remember, this wouldn't have been the first ward that the DA had lost to MK in eThekwini.
eThekwini, yeah.
Turns out to be safe, a bit of a damp squib for neutral observers. I think Rise Mzansi a big winner here, Jonathan, as a small party. The party only managed 0.5% of the vote in the provincial election last year. 3% they would take. If the party thought, hell, we could win 2, 3, 4% across similar wards in the metro, I mean, that's good for 3 or 4 seats in a metro where you've got no seats in a province where you haven't really had any representation. And maybe a parallel to last week's by-election where the PAC came in with 3%,
Mm,
Maybe
mm.
there's a place under the sun for some of these smaller parties to pick off the ANC's vote in particular.
Absolutely. And I know you sort of lukewarm sometimes about these smaller parties and their outsized influence, but they'll also be thinking about coalition opportunities in a situation where I think most of the metros will be coalition territory
Yeah.
next year. Let's go north to Sekhukhune in Limpopo, where in Ward 9 in Ephraim Mahali municipality, the ANC had a pretty comfortable hold of the ward, getting 69% of the vote, up slightly from the 66% they got in 2021. EFF placed second at 25%, slightly down from the 27% they got in 2021. MK contested this ward, getting 4% of the vote in Limpopo, and they were the sort of best of the rest. And interestingly, again, a turnout of 49%, almost 10 points higher than the 40% in 2021. But this probably demonstrating, Paul, that in rural areas such as Limpopo, the ANC is able to still hold on to its share of the vote, although, and I suppose Nala in the Free State also kind of bears that out, whilst they are collapsing in the metro. So yeah, I think you're starting in these by-elections to see the metro rural divide, or
It
urban
is
rural
def
divide, should I say? Yeah.
it's definitely growing, Jonathan. It speaks to the article we published on the ANC in the Northwest.
Mm,
Politically, electorally, still very strong. In an administrative service delivery area, not so good. But yes, and I wonder how this appeals to the party top brass or how it lands with them. I don't know if it's going to appeal to them that much. The fact that these strong successes, these strong outings in rural wards just seems to contrast and underline how poorly the party is doing in urban and metro areas. And for me, another thing, yes, MK didn't really find much purchase. 4%, you said the best of the rest. Normally, um, recently we've seen the MK as a serious contender.
mm,
Shows that the party is still not just guaranteed of taking a chunk of the
mm.
ANC, the DA's vote wherever it campaigns. Limpopo is probably going to be more of an uphill battle for the party.
Yeah, quite clearly. And I wonder if it's then going to think strategically about how it prioritizes things geographically in order to make the most impact and inflict the most damage and get the most coalition opportunities. But
Yeah,
I
I
think
think that's going to
yeah,
depend on how well
yeah,
its structures actually build ground forces ahead of the
absolutely.
election. I'm sure your results, your mileage may vary from provincial structure to provincial structure.
Yeah. So Paul, I think we can still agree that the ANC in by-elections, in polling, is in a very, very difficult space. And I think you pointed it out in respect of the Johannesburg results that, getting 34% in Soweto, in a ward in Soweto, really shows how much of on a back foot they are. So it's against that backdrop that I think it's good to look at this extraordinary, but I think also somewhat bizarre event on Monday, where
Mm,
the ANC, following its National Executive Committee meeting on the weekend, summoned all its local government councillors to Johannesburg. They met at a satellite venue on the sidelines of the FNB Stadium, and they met with President Ramaphosa amongst others. And I mean, I want to play out some quotes to you, Paul, because for me, I mean, I know that this potentially was intended to be a maybe a soft launch of a local government election campaign, a kind of show of force. There were, I think, 4,800 of the 4,900 odd ward and PR councillors present, and they had all their provincial executive committees, their task teams, their regional task teams. And, if you watched any of the footage from the event, it was more, I would say, a show of chaos rather than a show of force.
yeah.
Gwede Mantashe had to basically caution and tell people to sort of be a bit more respectful. People were milling around, walking around. There was quite clearly a bit of animus I thought you could see on faces. But I think the most extraordinary thing that happened, and that the DA has sort of seized upon with its usual efficient speed, is Cyril Ramaphosa pointing to DA-run municipalities as the benchmark of, good local governments, and encouraged ANC councillors to seek expertise. And just let me read out, for the sake of those that may have missed it, exactly what he said. I'm quoting here, he's saying, it's usually painful each time when the Auditor General comes to report to Cabinet, and those municipalities that do best are not ANC controlled municipalities. And I can name it here because there's nothing wrong with competition. They are often DA controlled municipalities. We need to ask ourselves, what is it that they are doing that is better than what we are doing? And then he goes on to say, there's nothing wrong with us saying we want to go and see what Cape Town is doing. We want to go and see what Stellenbosch is doing, how they craft everything. We need to be moving up the ladder or being good at what we do. We cannot forever stay at the bottom. Paul, I mean, a lot of people have expressed wonderment at this. I just think it's extraordinary that
Have you seen the memes, Jonathan?
I have. I mean, I've seen the stuff also that Helen Zille's putting out of him now in DA jogging gear and
That's the one.
and
That's the
sitting
one.
in a kind of classroom with her. It's astonishing. He seems to have basically impaled the ANC campaign on a big spear before it even got going.
Yes, and wow, has it been retweeted and analyzed and been the subject of so many opinion pieces, Jonathan? For Ramaphosa's detractors or even enemies within the ANC,
Mm,
this is seen as conclusive proof that he's working to undermine the party from within. As you said, the DA has seized upon this moment with both hands. The meme of Cyril's famous Sea Point Promenade jog, but in DA regalia. Ramaphosa looking over Zilla's shoulder in the classroom and copying her homework. It is extraordinary. And I think all the opposition parties are going to campaign on this. The president of the party says we cannot stay at the bottom all the time, and so on and so forth. But Jonathan, for me, apart from this moment, everything else you've spoken about, animus, enmity, or to use less fancy words, the fact that ANC members gathered together in their thousands don't seem to be liking or trusting each other.
mm,
And if you look at the commitments and the promises that have been made after the meeting and the 90 days or the 100 days that has been given to all these local government councillors to improve and then report back. It was sprung on them. And to me, and not just to me, I think to a lot of other uh, social media commentators, this seems to be the ANC top brass creating a scapegoat, saying, you've got to go and solve these problems in the next 3 months and report back on your progress. And I mean, there's no or else. I don't know if it's implied. Everyone's going to lose their job just before the election anyway and have to win an election to get it back. But it's crazy to me. And we could talk about the six pillars, the whatever, the new six top priorities that the ANC has identified, and
Mm,
I can run through them very quickly, but you cannot tell me that councillors, particularly ward councillors, and we've spoken about how little real power they have, how they're undermined, how if Joburg Water and Rand Water are collapsing, if money is stolen by MMCs, connected MMCs, how is a ward councillor supposed to turn around rotting water infrastructure in 3 months? So, this pillar of tackling core service delivery commitments for citizens, water sanitation, what are councillors supposed to do if the decision making and if the
mm,
infrastructure problems run into municipal entities, provincial government, national government? The same thing, effective and sustainable infrastructure, proper budget spending. How is that supposed to turn around in 3 months? Reconnect with the people and restore trust and accountability. So, on top of solving water infrastructure problems that are running into the billions, the councillors must then find extra hours in the day to set up community meetings and to regain the trust of the public in 3 months. Capable local government and institutional capacity, financial management, debt billing systems. If the Joburg, I know I use Joburg as an example, Jonathan.
mm.
If the billing system's been in a mess for years or decades, it's not going to be solved in 3 months. Inclusive local economic development, again, not the purview of councillors, not something they can turn around, not something that they can drive, at least not alone. Strategic communications, communicate challenges, interventions, and implementation. Jonathan, if the NEC top brass, if Mantashe, if Ramaphosa and Mantashe can't communicate properly without damning the party and insulting the councillors respectively, oh, you are good at singing, but dololo delivery. But that's par for the course for Mantashe because he is a bully. If the ANC at the top can't manage to do half of one of these six things, how are they going to push the responsibility all the way down the hill onto local government councillors?
Mm. Yeah, I'm still stunned, and just before I give my viewpoint, I mean another choice quote from Frank Chikane, saying this thing of the ANC of thieves must come to an end. And then he goes, I would like to say this event is extraordinary, but comrades, you cannot have a sewer running down the street when you have a branch and a ward councillor in that area. The ammunition that this one event has given the opposition, I mean, I'm sure the DA, I mean, they have their campaign adverts written for them already, as you said, do other opposition parties. But yeah, I think they are creating scapegoats. They have set themselves up for failure. What's going to happen in 90 days' time? Your city of Johannesburg had a task team set up by President Cyril Ramaphosa 6 months ago. I don't know what's happened to it. The mayor then sort of created the so-called bomb squad, who've been missing in action. You've even got the national government recently, in the form of Durka, who are planning for the G20, complaining about the infrastructure challenges around Nasrec, where the G20 summit will be heard, around Sandton, around the airports. So even though that's obviously not a city of Johannesburg, that'll be more Kuruleni, but they are, in a sense, criticizing the ANC-led local governments. The ANC is not going to be able to turn this around. The six pillars that you've helpfully run us through or what a sort of local government manifesto should have set out. It kind of seems obvious that they should be doing this. And now, with just over a year left to a local government election, there's panic. And then this is also sort of seen. I don't know if you've seen that Fikile Mbalula put out this service delivery. I don't know if it's a hotline or email address where you can mail in your service delivery problems to the ANC, which I mean, I don't know if people, I would say he would be inundated, but I suppose people are just like, well, nothing's going to happen if I just mail this in. But it would be very, very instructive to know if you mail in a service. Maybe you should do this, Paul. You should mail in some of your service delivery problems to the ANC email address and see if it gets responded to.
I
But
might just do that, Jonathan. I might
yeah,
just.
I thought it'd be interesting to see what the response is. But I just think it was a resounding um, failure, this roll call. It was a silly thing to do. And I mean, you mention how the ANC can't get on with, I mean, people within the ANC and within the NEC, there's already articles springing up of how angry they are with Cyril Ramaphosa for putting the ANC in this position. I mean, obviously the ANC is in this position regardless of any leadership or lack thereof by Cyril, but he's going to be on even more of the back foot internally because of this. And I think, we've spoken about it time and time again. The ANC is in decline. It just seems to be accelerating every day.
It's almost exponentially, Jonathan.
Mm.
You talk about handing ammunition to opposition parties. Jonathan, if I were the DA or an opposition party, I would take the money I was going to spend on posters and I would sponsor another ANC event. That's what I would
Absolutely.
that's what I would
Absolutely.
do. If you wanted bang for buck, keep them talking and in the same room with each other until they can't stand each other. It is a spectacular failure of public relations, of messaging. As you said, this should have been an election manifesto. Not that anyone would have believed it any better, because in real time, the same corruption, financial malfeasance, lack of communication is ongoing.
Mm.
Uh, but to to scapegoat the councillors, which is what it looks like, goes back to what we're saying, that the party is divided, members are at each other's throats. The truth is coming out at a time of panic, as you say, and uh, just to echo as a coder for the by-election results, if you're getting 34%, if that's your best case scenario in what was traditionally an ANC
In
ward
Soweto. Mm.
in Soweto, how far below 34% are you going to fall in the whole city of Johannesburg come next year? Um, I guess that's going to be the challenge of the analysts. How, not whether the party will fall, but to what level.
Yeah. And just, I mean, you mentioned opposition parties sponsoring the ANC. A question I'd actually love opposition parties to ask in the various councils is who paid for this event?
Mm,
Getting 5,000 odd people to travel to Johannesburg, obviously a significant proportion of them would have been based in Gauteng,
mm.
but the ANC is struggling financially. I think some of those opposition councillors throughout the country should ask who paid, and were any council funds used on getting people up to Johannesburg for that, because I think that's another interesting question, which I'll just leave there and just hope that any opposition councillor that may be listening, please do ask that question, because I think it's worth being asked.
Yes.
And Paul, I think just before we close out, the Madlanga Commission started yesterday.
Yes.
And we know, don't need to repeat here, the explosive allegations that were made by Lieutenant General Makwanazi, which prompted Cyril Ramaphosa to establish the commission, place the then Minister of Police, Senzo Mchunu, on special leave. I think yesterday's testimony, just I'm going to do my best to try and summarize it here. And again, as I reach for some notes here, it was again just incredibly damaging for Senzo Mchunu, but also again for the government, for the ANC. So Makwanazi was the first witness yesterday, and yesterday's testimony sort of focused on the political killings task team, which was mysteriously disbanded, and it involved Makunazi detailing how detectives investigating a murder in Gauteng where someone was sadly murdered in a case of mistaken identity, but it was linked to a dubious Transnet tender. The activities of the investigating team were threatened. There were bribes offered. And apparently and allegedly, and I think this is the inference being made, that because people thought that the political killings task team was starting to investigate organized crime in Gauteng linked to tenders, a decision was then made to disestablish the political killings task team by Senzo Mchunu, who was advised by as yet an unknown person. Now, it's probably way too early to dig into the details and draw analysis and give comprehensive, because I think as we record this, testimony is ongoing. But again, this is so the commission's been established. I think both you and I share a bit of cynicism about what maybe the recommendations of the commission will achieve in the end, whatever they may be, and how much of a change the commission will actually make. But again, I think in live real time, what is now being exposed is just the significant rot of the criminal justice system, the rot and this link between organized crime and those within the ANC and government, and in a probably a little more, well, a whole lot more sinister and obviously not comical at all like the ANC roll call. This is another event in the week that is just going to be inflicting blow after blow after blow to the ANC.
Definitely, Jonathan. And I think it's important if we think about the narratives as a country or what we carry around in our heads. I think once Ramaphosa replaced Zuma at Nasrec, the ANC's internal narrative, or the one that they wanted to share with the rest of the country, is that the state capture and the corruption happened under a particular administration and came to an end or wound down at a certain time. And, Tumamina, it's a new dawn, things are different. The sun is rising on a new ANC. What we are seeing from the commission, well, at least what I'm seeing from the commission, Jonathan, and it confirms my cynicism, as you alluded to, maybe other people are less jaded than me, is that these are structural systemic problems, namely political interference, heavy political interference by the ANC in the criminal justice system. Party members and at the top actively thwarting the criminal justice system, covering up, disbanding units that proved to be too effective, neutering other ones. And this is something that has gone on for a long time and seems to be continuing to go on with no break between ANC presidents or
Mm,
elections or administrations.
mm. Yeah, without a doubt. And I think it's obviously very sad for the country, but I think it again shows us in real time how rotten the ANC is, how it's continuing to decline in front of our very eyes. I think one of what maybe one final thought and a sort of open question I have in terms of the GNU is how do the GNU partners respond to what is going to and may potentially unfold at the commission? Because I mean, this is very, very serious, worrying stuff. And how, for example, does the DA respond and say, well, we're going to remain in government with the ANC, who are linked up and implicated and whose ministers, I suppose they will call for action to be taken, and it'll be interesting to see if they're further red lines. But and I'm probably being a little naive and idealistic here by thinking, I mean, and fully appreciate that one has to be pragmatic in the affairs of government. But at what point does the DA take a principled decision here, or other opposition parties for that fact? I know you're about to smile about principled decisions in
About
politics,
politicians taking principled
um,
decisions.
but
Sorry,
but
that's
yeah,
just me being cynical.
yeah, but I just think what's starting to, I mean, it was obviously explosive, the press conference
Yeah.
the next few days, and when Senzo Mkhunu, I mean, this is really serious stuff, and I still think a reckoning will come for many of the parties in the GNU because of being unsafe. I keep saying this when I write, when I talk, being unsafe, lack of jobs, etc., etc. This is really I think a risk for GNU coalition members to be aligned to something this serious, this bad.
I agree with you, Jonathan. Broadly, generally, it can't help internal GNU relations. No one is going to, no politician in other parties in the GNU is going to look at the events of the commission and go, well, I think it's a good idea and it makes us look good to be closer with the ANC. But there's pragmatism, there's realpolitik, there's possibly a concern, at least in the short term, that as a country, we should present a united front
Yeah,
for the G20.
yeah.
That even if you want to be cynical, and I do a lot of the time want to be cynical, even if you want to be cynical and say politicians are self-serving, I don't know if anyone wants to stand up and go, I would like to upset the apple cart before the end of the year. Um, and I think also keeping in mind, I don't think we believe everything the DA talked about when it said we've prevented a doomsday coalition.
Mm.
But I do think the general public would prefer a slightly stable or
Yeah,
maybe
true.
marginally rickety GNU than the chaos of courting the EFF of the ANC courting the EFF or MK reconfiguring alignments in other spheres of government. I don't know. None of us knows when the reckoning will come or when the parties will pull away. I think I'll take a bet, although, my record's not so good. I think it's safe that we won't see anything until the new year. Of
Yeah.
course, we don't know what explosions will come out of the commission next week. I
Mm.
could still be proven wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think your bet is pretty safe. We've discussed extensively before. I think the G20 is top of people's minds. I do think that there are some important decisions that parties will have to make ahead of the local government election and the beginning of next year. And of course, as we move into another budget process,
Mm.
which already is what 7, 8 months away. That also has the potential to be rather explosive. But then again, I mean, I'm always, my idealism makes me think that sometimes there are a few people that do things for the right reasons. But Paul, always good to have you here to remind me of the political pragmatism that is required. And I suppose, people do want stability. And of course, if that six-pillar action plan from the ANC can be actioned in the next 90 days, then happy days for everybody involved.
Quite right. I don't. Let's not make a virtue out of the cynicism and the skepticism or even the pessimism.
Mm,
Um, but yes, I think a holding pattern for all parties concerned, they'll think that it'll benefit them. There is value in having a stable national coalition as things go on. I don't think in the short term, I don't feel in the short term it's going to hurt any GNU partner to remain within the
no,
GNU. I've, and again, I don't want to be projecting. I'd love to hear from some of our viewers, but I think most South Africans will still hold the ANC responsible for the
yeah,
ANC's faults.
yeah, yeah, quite clearly. And the data points that we do have, which mainly are by-elections and the public polling we did have available towards the beginning of this year does show that. Paul, thank you as ever for your time and your insights. We will be back next episode with a podcast featuring Mbali and Tuli that we recorded last week in studio. So look forward to that. But there's obviously a lot of things coming up. We've got the next round of by-elections on the 1st of October. Obviously, the Madlanga Commission continues. Cyril Ramaphosa is going off to the UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, and on the sidelines will try and repair some of the issues with the US. So that's, I think, one to watch, and of course the ongoing preparations for the G20 summit. So there's no shortage of things to talk about, discuss, and unpack. So we'll be back shortly to unpack those things. But in the meantime, thanks as ever to those of you that do subscribe and watch and listen. Please do share, and also we'd love to hear your thoughts, views, comments, questions going forward. Paul, until next time, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you. And yes, until next time.